Okay, so the first time I really took note of the effects of snakes on neurodivergent people was at one of the little zoos community days for autistic kids. So we do these free events once every month or two with the Professional Child Development Associates nonprofit. It's an organization that helps young folks with autism and their families through like community and relationship building and therapy services. And they come to the zoo events and they bring the kids and often some of their family members to spend some time with the animals. And we set up stations around with the different types of animals so they can kind of wander through. Um, and I was shocked that my snake table was surrounded for like almost the entire 2 hours. And these kids could not get enough of them. And some of the kids were high functioning, communicative. They were offering commentary about what they knew or thought they knew about them, asking questions. And then there were other kids who were super quiet and just wanted to hold the animals. Either way, there was just this level of focus and interest that was really interesting to me. But one of the most interesting interactions that really struck me was this young man who he was not very verbal, but he managed to let me know that he really wanted to hold a snake. So I talked to him about how to hold it properly and handed the snake to him. And he just stood there and was just completely focused on this animal, so calm and gentle. And I let him be for 10 or 15 minutes. And then when I turned back to ask if I could take the snake back and I kind of went towards him, he almost violently startled back from me when I got within a couple of feet of him. He did not want me in his personal space. I think he actually said, like, space, and yet he was getting so much out of the direct contact with this animal and the connection to the animal, the touch. And I will never forget that because it was just like, so he didn't want anything to do with a human's touch and he needed personal space, but yet the snake was just all
That is
in that
fascinating.
moment.
So there was some tactile experience that he was craving that he was not getting somewhere else. And it was obviously a very different experience touching people. People's skin is moist and warm and, something that's cool and dry. And for whatever reason, it was connection.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's also that he chose.
Right.
He chose the interaction. And that's a big thing that comes up in the next category with neurodivergent keepers too. It's come up a lot, is that it's an intentional interaction, whereas people are unpredictable.
Yes.
And there's expectation and they're complicated. And this is not that. Snakes is not that. So as far as keeping and neurodivergent folks, I mean, I can speak from my own experience. I didn't know I was ADHD and with anxiety disorder. I didn't know until later in life. And I was, masking a lot of those characteristics too. But once I did, and I started actively learning more about neurodiversity in depth, that's when I started to kind of make this connection in my head. And I realized that as far as my experience, the snakes were acting as a positive way to narrow my focus and my distraction, physically, holding them, it caused me to stop and be present and mindful. It eased my anxiety. Even just observing them can help with that, right? And then you need that presence and that mindfulness in order to make them feel safe, right? You have to be there. You have to watch their body language. You can't be all over the place.
Yeah.
And if you do this, there's this amazing reward of trust that you get. It's very unique that you get this trust from that. They don't judge you. Again, they're not humans with complicated social cues that you have to think about and They don't they don't demand your attention
Mm.
like a dog or a cat. They're not going to like jump in your lap, you know. You are prepared for the interaction. You are intentionally interacting with them. Um, there's no social conventions that you have to worry about. No expectations to say or do something.
Yeah.
You're just yourself. They allow you you're just yourself. And then there's those what we talked about earlier is those purposes, the sense of purpose and the tasks, the routines, which when you're neurodivergent can be very hard to keep on. You have to complete these tasks. You can't just not do them. So that's a real positive for people like me, where I can't be, nope. This time to this time, I have to go through a series of motions that complete tasks. So that really helps me. And then there's hyperfocus.
I think everybody's a lot of people listening will be like, oh yeah, I know that.
Yeah. So those of us who are neurodivergent have a tendency to hyperfocus, somewhat obsess on something. And in this case, it's positive. It's learning about animals. It's learning about caring and learning about how to, make another being's life better. Yeah. That's a healthy outlet for hyperfocus. There are plenty of bad outlets for hyperfocus. So it's not going to harm you, and it's certainly not going to harm, it's going to help the animal to hyperfocus. And the more I thought about this from my experience, the more I noticed how many times I'd seen keepers referencing their ADHD, like just offhand references on Instagram or whatever, or seeing their autistic kids were interacting with the reptiles and seeing how cool it was to watch. And, and I listened to Summer Winston talk about their experience with Roy on Project Herpeticulture.
Yes, yeah.
That episode was amazing. And that's when I was like, wait a minute, maybe this is a thing. Like, not just for me, but maybe this is a thing. So I that's when I kind of like sat down and hyper-focused on hyper-focusing.
Yeah. Like hyper-focus inception. Yeah.
Yeah. I sat down and just wrote about my own experience. And then within a few hours, I'd done that and built a survey to see if more people might want to share and talk about it, and to see if it was a thing,
Oh yeah. I mean, I want to talk about that survey too, so we'll come back to that point. I think it absolutely is a thing. I mean, I think many people are definitely either on the autism spectrum. I shouldn't say many, but many, but maybe not the majority, but many are on the spectrum that way, or lots of ADHD situations. And I mean, I think obviously it can get the wrong way where you start hyper focusing on the wrong things, like purchasing things, and you start getting these large collections. But
definitely want to talk to you about that.
Yeah. So we'll get into that. But one point that I think was great that you mentioned was this voluntary side to it. And for me personally, I love dogs. I don't have a dog, and I'll probably never have a cat because my wife and I are both allergic. But dogs are, to me, they can be very overwhelming because there's this sense of like there's a needy side to it where they come to you, and I do love dogs. I love playing with dogs, but there's something about having reptiles that doesn't have that pressure associated with like need.